this is our last chapter together. We're talking about organizational change and stress management. Okay, so change is just doing something different than what was done before. If you aren't doing anything different, you really don't need the leadership to implement or oversee or work through a change. Changes can be planned or unplanned. A planned change is intentional and goal-oriented. Goals of planned change include improving the ability of the organization to deal with whatever is coming from the outside the environment. So if you're looking out into the environment and thinking, hey, these changes are coming, well, that will often lead you to a planned change which will be there to mitigate it so that you're not caught off guard by whatever is coming down the pike. Planned change is also to change behavior, to get something to actually change in the way that we actively operate. Overcoming resistance to change. Well, let me back up. So change often leads to resistance. Why? Because it's not what we've done before. It's something different than what we've done, and so it's a little upsetting. Peter Drucker talks about every intervention that you as a manager make when you tell somebody to do something differently than what they're doing. It's like a surgery. It's invasive, but you can overcome a lot of resistance through things like education and communication, participation, building support and commitment, developing positive relationships. The book also number six here is manipulation and co-option. That's not necessarily the best example. Number 8, coercion. Yeah, so you can overcome resistance to change with coercion, but you're going to pay a heavy cost if you force people to do something. Whether that is that they're just going to dig in and go slower, or they're going to leave, or whatever it is, you have to weigh the cost, because if you force change on people, it usually doesn't end well. The politics of change, because change is threatening the status quo, it makes it a political activity, and because of that, employees are likely to react poorly. They'll have kind of an allergic reaction to the change. So the change process, they talk about 4 of them here. Kurt Levine's 3-step model, Kotter's 8-step model of change, action research, and organizational development. I'm only going to briefly talk about each of them. So Levine is unfreezing, and then you move, and then you refreeze. But it's more than that. So you have restraining forces and you have driving forces, and the restraining forces are holding you where they are no matter how much you're pushing. So if you can release some of the restraining forces, if you can mitigate those so the driving forces can push, you can move up to the level that you are, and then if you can keep it there, you'll freeze it in the organizational culture over time. That's the idea. Kotter's 8-step plan for implementing change. This is really interesting and is very important. Most of what goes wrong with change processes is that the leaders come up with this great idea. They've been thinking about it for a long time, and they say, hey, if we just did this, and we unveil our plan, and we start here at step number 3, create a new vision to direct the change and strategies for achieving the vision. And then we roll out the plan and we communicate the vision to the organization, and then it goes on and on from there. But it falls flat. It doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because we never started in the right place at part 1. Step 1 is establish a sense of urgency by creating a compelling reason for why the change is needed. More often than not, Kotter says in his book Leading Change, more often than not, the reason that a change effort fails is because the people involved they didn't have a sense of urgency. They weren't feeling like, wow, this really needs to change, or this is important to change. Now, if they can research this and come to the term like, yeah, we really ought to change this, they will already have an urgency that will help them create the guiding coalition, which will help them create the new vision, which will help them communicate the vision throughout the organization and empower, and so on and so forth. But more often than not, what the reason that it doesn't work is because we start with step 3 rather than step 1. Okay, action research. Action research is a change process based on systematic collection of data and then operating from there. So you start with diagnosis and then analysis, feedback, action, evaluation. And you understand this process, right? But you have to start with diagnosis. You have to start with getting the reason why this is important. Then the analysis, feedback, action, evaluation becomes a loop from that point forward. Action research provides a few benefits, including it's being very problem focused, and it also reduces the resistance to change, just like in Kotter's model, starting at step 1 reduces the resistance to change. Organizational development are a number of tools that we use in order to change things within organizations. It is very focused on the value of human activity, the personal growth, working together, hearing each other in the process. Underlying values in OD efforts are things like respect for people, trust and support, confrontation, participation. And so we'll deal with things like sensitivity training and using surveys and team building, appreciative inquiry. These are all means of organizational development. Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about organizational change and stress. Changes can very often be stressful because employees feel threatened. They were doing something a certain way, and now you're told, no, you can't do that. They're told. It's not that they chose to do it, because if they chose to do something differently, then they would not be stressed by it because they're doing the change. But if they're told to it from somewhere else, now it becomes a stressful thing. Employees need to see the changes as fair. They need to have some control in the process, and they want to participate. And if you allow them to participate, there's less pushback more often than not. So the role of leadership in allowing these things is very critical to the success or failure of the change. What causes you the most stress in life? Number one answer: my job. That's unfortunate. I have a quote that I show in another class that says, "You are the people that your employees are talking about at night." That's really sobering, right? Your employees are going to be talking about you at night one way or the other. Are they going to be saying good things or cursing you? What area causes you the most stress? My job. Second, my finances, sometimes related to my job, not always. Health, and then other. But the highest, the leading one, and probably more than that because the finances being tied to it, is my job. Cultural differences in stress. U.S. employees tend to be stressed by a lack of control. I hear this again and again from my MBA students. That is lack of control. That's the leading issue. That lack of control and or micromanagement, which is part of the same thing, right? The thing that my graduate students have told me since for at least a decade, is micromanagement is the thing that they hate the most within their organization. Chinese employees are different. They're stressed out by job evaluations and a lack of training. So they experience things differently. But research shows that it doesn't matter if you're this stressed or that stressed. Stress is bad for you. Now, when we think about stress, there is a link between stress and poor health. There's this book, The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor. And he shows that there's some research that if you have a bad relationship with your direct boss, not necessarily the president of the organization, but your boss, if you have a bad relationship with your manager, it's as bad as if you ate a diet of greasy food all the time. Okay, so because of what it's doing to you in the process, the frustration and tension and anger that builds up. Managing stress. When management is trying to motivate, very often they'll think that if they can just keep you pushed a little bit, then that's a good thing. They're just trying to give you some positive stimulus that's going to keep you moving, right? But it's experienced very often by employees as excessive pressure, and so they are stressed all the time. Management thinks it's doing a good job, but management would do much better if they could relieve ebb and flow with that stress, not have it as a constant thing. Strategies to manage stress include things like better selection. Again, going back to the last chapter, if you don't have appropriate organizational employee fit, that's going to be a problem. Better training, realistic job setting, redesign of jobs, employee involvement. And I can't stress enough how important involvement is. So the reason for participation and involvement is not that you're just trying to get a better answer. It's good. You may very well get better answers, but if I have a say in my fate, I'm much less likely. It'll take the wind out of my sails from fighting it. All right. think about a presidential election. Go back at least 3 or 4 presidential elections. You probably didn't vote for every one of these guys, but you're not trying to overthrow the system because you had your voice. If you don't have voice, then you feel very differently if it's just imposed upon you than if you had a say. So employee involvement, I can't stress enough how important that is to overcoming resistance to change. Improved communication, employee sabbaticals, not every place can do that. Employee corporate wellness programs, all of these are ways of managing stress. Now, what are the implications for managers? First, consider that you as a manager, you're like the person that controls the thermostat. You can make it more miserable or you can make it less miserable depending on what you do, how you interact with people, the relationship that you have, what you say and what you do matching. All those things are important. Your management policies and practices will determine the degree to which the organization learns and adapts to what you're trying to change to. So you have to be consistent and you are on stage. Just understand that if you're in a leadership position, we're looking at you to see if what you're telling us is the same as what you're doing. Think about others first. One thing people want to know is they want to know, do you care about them? Think of them. How will they respond? What would you do if you were in their shoes? They're much more likely to respond positively if you've considered their thoughts and their feelings and even solicited their feedback. As long as they feel that they can trust you, they'll give you feedback and help you in the process. But those are the ways that you want to think about how to deal with change and stress. Okay, we've completed the book. And thank you very, very much for your time and attention. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.